You're listening to the What's Happening podcast with Gary Watts.
Good morning. I'm here with Doug Alberhasky of John's Grocery in Iowa City. So, good morning, Doug.
Good morning.
How are you?
I'm doing fantastic.
We're here to talk about a lot of things, but let's just start talking about beer. How about
I love beer.
And then tell us a little history about your family, how you got interested in beer, John's Groceries. I mean, I think you can just roll with this.
Oh,
but
yeah,
I think
no.
the history and the generational thing you got going on is all kinds of cool things.
Well, thank you. Yeah, no, we're the oldest continually operated business in Iowa City. There's been a grocery store at our location for 175 years.
Wow.
And when my grandparents bought it, it was already 100 years old. So they opened up in 1948, and we've been kind of going strong ever since. I started working there when I was about 6. I'm not sure how much help I was back when I was that young, but I do remember that fondly. And working alongside my grandpa, my grandma, and my dad was just pretty amazing. And I kind of rolled that in with my own son. He started kind of hanging out with me. We called him JD Daddy days when he was about like 2.5 years old. And wherever I went, he went with me. And it was amazing learning for him because it wasn't teaching him. He was just observing it. And I really knew that it had an effect on him when he was a Tiger Scout in Cub Scouts, first grade, and he wanted to sell enough popcorn so that the big grand prize was a Nintendo Wii. And he goes, "Dad, I really want to set up a selling booth outside of John's." I said, "Sure, no problem, but this is all you. I'm not going to, I'll get you set up, but you got to talk to people." "No problem, Dad." And this gal came up and in that squeaky little voice, he goes, "You want to buy some Cub Scout popcorn?" And she goes, "Oh, honey, I'd love to. I just don't have any cash." And with the skill of a trained assassin, he goes, "Well, that's all right. We got an ATM right inside the back door."
That's hilarious.
And she's, "Okay, yeah."
How old was he then?
6. So, but that's the learning that happens in a family business, and that's why I think I'm so lucky that I got to work alongside so many of my family members, and they taught me from day one how to work, and it kind of shows when you look at the amount of family businesses that survive to a 4th generation is like 2/100 of 1%, and it really does say something about our location, but also our family.
Tell us a little bit about what you did when you were a kid. Did you sweep? Did you stack beer? What?
Everything. Grandpa always called me the chief cook and bottle washer, and there was nothing that I wouldn't be asked to do. I always kind of got a shiver up my spine when my grandpa would say, "Doug, you're going to earn a higher place in heaven today." Oh, no. But it was sorting cans. It was stocking. It was helping Grandpa. We had a lot of rentals and stuff back in the day, so that's how I kind of got started in property maintenance. And I now have another business that I do snow removal, lawn care, tree removal, remodeling, and all that along with John. So that's kind of how I got my start, just kind of puttering around with Grandpa and helping him fix things.
It's amazing. So I know it was about a year ago. I think I got a tour of the beer caves.
Yeah.
And a lot of people don't realize the history of beer in Iowa City.
Oh, it's
and
amazing.
The beer caves under Lynn and Market.
Yeah.
And so if you want, can you get into Brewery Square and underneath?
Oh, sure.
And the late 1800s, what was going on in Iowa City as far as beer and the beer mafia? And these stories are just amazing to me, the history of it.
Oh, yeah. I mean, and that's the thing that people, they drive by it every day and they don't realize the history that we had there. So at one point, we had 3 production breweries right in the block. There was one going from Bluebird to George's. There was one right across the street going from Artifacts over to the coffee shop, and then there was one in Brewery Square. The earliest one was the Englert City Brewing Company. That was 1853. That's where Artifacts to the coffee shop is. The second one was the J.P. Dossel Great Midwestern, which is where Bluebird to George's. That was the largest of the three. That was built in 1856. And then the Hudson Geiger Graff Union Brewing Company is where Brewery Square still stands today, and that was 1856 as well. At one point in my research, I figured that there was about 1/7 of the population of Iowa City back in the day was involved in one way, shape, or form in the brewing industry. And, beer was life back then because you really couldn't drink the water because it could make you sick or kill you. But beer, since it was basically cooked water with extra fun stuff in it, was perfectly safe to drink. And, you think about how much life has changed back then. We would think that we're so evolved, but when people go down in the beer caves and see what was done all by hand, there are no pneumatics, there's no hydraulics. It was all just people and horsepower, and it really is amazing to see what they're able to accomplish on such a grand scale. And by taking people down into those beer caves, it really gives them a connection to our past. Now, when you talk about the beer mafia and the beer riots, Iowa actually had 4 different prohibitions. And the second of those 4 prohibitions was culminated in the beer riots in 1884. There were a couple different very large immigrant populations in Iowa City back in the day. There is the English, and they were pretty much all Methodists and Presbyterians. Then you had Germans, Irish, and Bohemians, and our family's from Bohemia. We immigrated in 1861, so I'm actually the 7th generation in Iowa City. And back then, the different immigrant groups really didn't like each other, but and they were separated by their churches. You had St. Wentz on the north side in Goosetown. You had St. Mary's, which was pretty much German, and that was in the middle of town. And then you had St. Pat's, which was for the Irish, and that was on the south side of town. But the thing that brought them all together was beer. Now, the Methodists were the dries, and the Catholics being the wets. They really didn't get along very well. And when you look at where Van Allen Hall is, that was Church Park. That was one of the blocks that was designated just to be able to have a nice meeting space. That's actually where the Barnum and Bailey Circus actually came to town, and that was the largest, biggest event to happen in Iowa City in the 19th century, bar none.
What year was that?
It was actually 1885. But in the book Beer Money that we'll go into, we actually Steve Sherman, the author, actually moved it to 1884 to kind of coincide with everything else going on, but it actually happened a year later. But those groups were really butting heads, and it culminated in a statewide vote on July 4th of 1884. And it was done on a county-by-county basis. Should we have prohibition? And it was a prohibition to sell, not to make. But at that time, you didn't drink beer from Cedar Rapids or the Quad Cities. You only drank Iowa City beer. It was so hyper-local. And Conrad Graff, who is the brewmaster for Simeon Hotz and Anton Geiger at the Union Brewing Company, he had just married Simeon's daughter and purchased the brewery from both men. And he basically invested his life savings into this brewery. And all of a sudden, the more things change, the more they stay the same. There was a little bit of contention in the vote. In Iowa City, prohibition passed in Johnson County. Now, on the east side of the state, along the Mississippi, it did not pass because everybody knew that if they passed it, their town was going to die because everybody's just going to go over to Illinois and drink. But in Johnson County, it passed by the slimmest of margins. And so on July 4th, 1884, prohibition came to Iowa City. The brewmasters basically said, no, we're going to keep going. And 2 Methodist brothers actually turned state's evidence and said that we'll testify that the brewers were selling after the date. There was a Methodist who was a lawyer, and he was going to be the prosecutor. And And he decided, because he knew that he wasn't going to be able to get a for sure conviction at the Johnson County Courthouse, he was going to take the trial to Scott Township, now where Scott Boulevard is, to Judge Snell's house, who also was a Methodist, because that's where a bunch of Methodists live. And that's where he was going to hold the trial. Now, the brewers said, no, this isn't fair. They decided that they were going to have like a little rally. They were going to give away free beer. And the constable at the time said, nope, can't do that. Lock the doors to the bar where they were going to have the free beer at. The group that had gathered to drink free beer was going to have free beer. So they broke down the doors and proceeded to drink every ounce of beer in the place. And then, led by Graff and Englert and Dostal, the 3 brewery owners, they marched out to Judge Snell's house with now the mob. And they proceeded to almost beat to death the 2 brothers that were the informants, and they tarred and feathered the prosecutor. Now, you'd think that you'd get in trouble for that, but Englert was actually a member of the city council, and he was so revered that he was actually eventually elected to be sheriff of Johnson County. So imagine that. You almost beat to death somebody, and you get elected to be sheriff.
And was that out at like Scott Boulevard?
Yeah, exactly. Way out on the east side of town. Yeah. Okay. And they got off with a fine, and the state Supreme Court actually ruled that the law as it was written was unconstitutional. So they got to gain back the ability to sell. But the damage was kind of done, and Iowa, along with Kansas, basically were the first 2 states that passed the final prohibition, and we had prohibition in Iowa 3 years before the 18th Amendment in 1919. So that was a very dark day for beer lovers, but we're really excited because we're actually we're going to be making a movie, and like you, I had given a number of beer cave tours, and a number of years ago, for 100+ men and 100+ women, we did an event right on Lynn Street, and it was a very shortened tour because I think we ended up taking like 60 people down in an afternoon, just kind of one group after another. But one of the gentlemen that went down there by the name of Steve Sherman, he's a realtor here in Iowa City, he was so enthralled with it that he decided to write a book called Beer Money. And it was a historicalized fiction based on the true events that happened. The only things that really are not true to form is the main character, Teddy, is pretty much made up just to kind of help the story along. And then some of the characters are kind of amalgamations of a couple different people. And then, like I said, the Barnum and Bailey Circus happened the year after that. But besides that, everything in the book is factual. And that's gone over so well that we decided that we were going to hire a screenplay writer. He's a local guy, graduated of West High, and he's got a couple movies under his belt. And his last one was filmed completely here in Johnson County, called East and Middle West. And I'm going, hey, that's Sam's Main Street Market. Hey, that's Melrose. I recognize all these places. And we have garnered enough interest that we're going to be filming on June 10th next month a 8-minute sizzler, as they call it in the industry, and I'm so not into Hollywood stuff, but I'm just using their terms, that we're going to then take and show to some larger investors to be able to get the movie made. It's going to be a full-length motion picture style movie, but we're trying to get it done on an Iowa budget instead of a Hollywood budget. We're hoping to raise about $250,000, and the State of Iowa Tourism Board has already said that they will match us dollar for dollar to be able to get up to the $500,000 we think it's going to take to film the movie.
What's the period of this? Is it in 1880?
1884, yeah.
That's the period of the movie.
Yep, exactly.
Tell us a little bit about back in that day that there were 3 breweries, right?
Yeah. Correct.
And then how much did they manufacture? Wasn't it one time about the same size as Milwaukee, all the breweries in Milwaukee?
At that point, the population of Iowa City was about 7,000 people. But per capita, yeah, we made as much beer as they made in Milwaukee per capita. And I love the fact that in my presentation, I've got a little slide. It says I can't remember. I think it was like 1864. There were 3 breweries and 40 bars for 7,000 people. And I always say that you really call that stumbling distance, but it really was a fact that beer was life, and it was so important because you had such a rich tradition, because you had all these folks from Bohemia and Bavaria and from Ireland coming over, and that was part of their culture.
And everybody in Iowa City worked there, right?
Yeah, for the most part, yeah. And it's been amazing. Like, over the years, I got to know very well the state archaeologist, Marlon Ingalls. And he's been, so amazingly helpful in giving me so much information and pictures to be able to add to my presentation. But I never realized that when they moved the state capital from Iowa City to Des Moines to kind of, throw us a bone, so to speak, the state of Iowa gave Iowa City, because we had all these brand new buildings that we had just completed for the state capital, the State University of Iowa and the state hospital. And that's why we have the University of Iowa Hospitals and Clinics, one of the best hospitals in the world, right here in Iowa City.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
So what was the names of the beer back then? It wasn't like Old Mill, was it?
No. So it was so the Union Brewery, theirs was Grass Golden Glow. And I've got a couple ads, and it says, it brewed expressly for family use, because they're kind of going against, like the overconsumption and all that. For Dostal's, the Great Midwestern, it was Erlanger, and that was the beer that made Milwaukee jealous. And that was their tagline. And I'm not sure of the Englerts. One of the last tours that I did, there are actually some descendants of the Englert family, and we're going to go through a huge box of pictures and other things, and I'm so excited to have that.
Yeah. So you got the beer caves. There was water. Can you tell us a little bit about the water down through there where they slid the kegs?
Oh, yeah. Cool. So in the caves as they are now, the cave network was actually much bigger originally, but when Economy Advertising took over the building, they kind of took out a couple of the caves for footings for their large presses and all that. But in the keg room, there is a trough in the floor about 4 foot wide, and we figure it's probably about like 8 inches deep originally. And they'd actually float the kegs, because as they were maturing, they kept rolling the kegs back to the back of the cave. And as soon as they got to the back of the cave, they were mature and ready to go. For a lager beer, it takes about a week of fermentation and then a month to completely finish. And so they kept rolling those kegs back, and as they were completely finished, then they would put them in that trough, and they'd actually roll them very easily through the water, because they would be kind of floating down to the freight elevator to take them up stairs to be ready to go out. And it's just, again, it's amazing what they had, the technology that they had back in such, as we would think of as a primitive time.
How heavy were they? I mean, that's why they're
on water.
Yeah,
so empty, those barrels weigh over 170 pounds. So full, they would have been 500 pounds, yeah.
Wow, it's amazing.
Yeah.
So let's just talk briefly about, how do you make beer? You talked a little bit about fermentation.
Sure, yeah.
What are some of the ingredients that, I know you've been all over Europe, haven't you?
And we're going back next week, in fact.
But just tell us a little bit about how do you make a beer? Or what?
Yeah, so there's really 2 different types of beer. There's ales and there's lagers, and then there's also kind of hybrids of a mixture in between. But for most beer, there's really 4 ingredients. There's malted barley. That's going to be the backbone of the beer. That's going to give the beer its flavor, its color. Then you have hops. Hops are going to be the preservative in the beer, and that's going to give it its bitterness. The water is the most important part. And actually, back in the day, Iowa City's water was amazing for brewing. and then you have the yeast that kind of binds it all together and kind of gets the whole process going.
Where do you
And-
get the barley and the hops?
Actually, back in the day, they were all grown locally.
Right here.
Yeah. So when you look at Bohemia and Bavaria, latitude-wise, we're basically on the same latitude in Iowa as they were back in the old country, and that's why the immigrants, when they came here, they said, "This is God's country. This is exactly like where we left, but there's not the strife and there's freedom." And so it was very good to be able to grow those crops. And that's why, you think about, like shipping and all that. Well, nothing was shipped back in the day. We have in my presentation a couple slides of the boiler room of the Dostal Great Midwestern Brewing Company, and everything was made right here in Iowa City. There was nothing that came over from communist China. It was all done right here.
It's amazing.
It is. It is. And to think about again, that they did that 160 years ago.
So after you make it up, then do you boil it for a while? Then
Yeah. So basically, it goes. You have the malted barley, and it goes through a mill. And these are all vertical breweries where they had basically put the raw ingredients way up high in the top of the brewery, and they just let it flow down. The malted barley goes into the brew house. That brew house is basically a big kettle where it's warming up the water, and you put the malted barley in it. The barley, after it's gone through the grist mill, is going to be cracked, and so you're basically trying to get all the goodness out of the interior of the barley, and you're going to move it back and forth a couple times, and you're going to basically kind of spin it, and you're going to try to get all of the heavy waste grain out of it. And so after that, you have something called wort. That wort is then really filtered out well. It's then cooled down because it's going from super hot to cold. And then it goes into the fermentation tanks. And the fermentation tanks back in the day would have been open vats. They would have been made of cypress wood. And they would have been, probably about like 8 to 10 foot tall. And that's where the yeast is added. And it's going to spend about a week in those fermentation tanks, basically, and the yeast is feeding off of the sugars from the malts, and their byproducts are carbon dioxide and alcohol. And then after it's done fermenting, then it'll be lagered, meaning to store cold. And that's why they had to have these caves, which are about 35 foot underground, so that it's a constant temperature down
50
there.
50 degrees?
Yep,
or
50
something?
degrees. And then they would add a little bit of ice to keep it as cold as they would need. But then it would be kegged, and then those kegs then would have to mature for about another month until it was ready to drink. And that's what the lagering process is. Now, ales are much quicker. An ale is top fermenting yeast with warm fermentation, and those ales can be done in about a week as opposed to a month plus. And that's why so many of our microbreweries like Big Grove and Reunion are making ales as opposed to lagers, because the lagers just take a lot longer to do.
So when they made a batch or whatever you call it, how much did they make at a time?
It
So many
depends on the
gallons?
brew house. So you would probably, it'd probably be like 50 barrel batches, I'd imagine. And so that was a lot of liquid. And one of the first real engineering projects in Iowa City was something called Beer Creek. And, you look at the topography of Iowa City, and it's nothing like it was back in the day. You actually had a creek that ran from Happy Hollow Park up by Brown Street all the way down to the river. And in order to brew 1 gallon of beer, it takes 4 gallons of water. And having all that runoff from 3 production breweries in one spot was a mess. So the brewers actually got together, and they basically built the first sewer system in Iowa City. And it was made with 1 foot thick, 5 foot by 5 foot chunks of limestone. And they basically ran it all the way from Happy Hollow down to the river. And that was the first sewer system in Iowa City.
Wow. We
Yeah.
just dumped it in the river. Huh?
Yeah, yeah.
Things have changed since then.
Yeah, but back then, I mean, the waste from brewing is amazingly clean, and I think about like Big Grove, and 7 days a week they have a farmer that's coming with a huge dual axle gooseneck trailer to get all their spent grain, and those are some happy livestock that he has.
I bet they are.
Yeah.
So tell us, was there a fire back then? Was there one of the
Yeah.
breweries had a fire, right?
Yeah. So J.P. Dostal, he kind of saw prohibition coming, and so he actually had probably the nicest mansion in town. It was on the corner of Van Buren and Bloomington Street, and he actually donated his house to the Sisters of Mercy, and that's kind of it became part of Mercy Hospital. And he always had two guys that kind of stood watch in the brewery to guard against fire overnight, and he gave those two guys the night off, and the brewery burned down. And so to this day, if you went into the city parking lot between Bluebird and George's, and you dug down about like 2-3 feet, you'd find a couple million bricks, because they basically just bulldozed the brewery into the caves underneath, and that was a very sad day.
Yeah, I bet. And wasn't there some sinking because of the sewers in the beer caves?
Yeah. So
Glen Street.
Well, in the Poly Ice parking lot, they've had multiple times where they've had sinkholes that have opened up. And I guess one time, I don't remember this personally, but I heard stories of guy came out to find his car 12 foot down in a sinkhole. And so they quickly pulled it up, and the city came and quickly got it filled up, because they didn't want anybody else seeing that.
Sinkhole.
Yeah.
Tell us about when you go to Europe. What do you do? Do you look at other breweries, see how they're doing it, what they're making?
What's
a tour like?
It's really a history lesson. I mean, I'm obviously a huge fan of history, and so my son JD graduates from Central College in Pella on Saturday, and next Tuesday we leave. And when we visit those breweries, we're looking at the history and the reason why they do things. Why did they brew with these ingredients? Why did they make this sort of beer? And I always tell my guys at John's, we're storytellers, and when you can let people know a story about a particular beer or a particular brewery, it gives them a connection. And the amazing thing with Iowa City is that we've had so many people that have traveled abroad, and when you've been to Munich, when you've been to Bruges, when you've been to London, you get it, and you're having the right food and the right beer all together in such an amazing place. It just completes the story, and that's what I want to give to my son, so that he can be as excited about beer as I am.
Tell us a story. Wasn't there something? And I remember you talking about it before. A gentleman flew in from Alaska.
Oh yeah.
To get some beer here at John's Grocery. Came all the way to Iowa City, flew down.
Yep.
What was that? Tell us that story. That's a great one.
Well, so back in the day, and this was a holdover from Prohibition, anything over 6.25% alcohol was actually considered to be liquor rather than beer. So many of our local breweries couldn't make all the different types of beer that they would want. This gave us an opportunity, though, so I started actually going directly to a bunch of different importers, and where normally the brewery would hire an importer, and the importer would have their salespeople to go call on a distributor, and their salespeople would go call on a retailer like me. Well, I was going straight to the owner of the import company and saying, hey, I want to buy your beer. And so I developed a really good relationship with all of the top importers in the United States from the top breweries in the world. And one of those beers was so rare that every bottle was hand numbered. And I looked at the number of bottles that were made, total of 4 different types. And then I looked at the number of bottles that we had, and we had 1/6 of the world's supply of the Louis Pepe line of Cantillon lambics, which are probably some of the most exquisite beers ever made. And this customer called up the importer, Dan Shelton, and said, hey, I'm looking for this beer. Where should I go? And he goes, well, John's Grocery in Iowa City. So he flew in his own plane from Anchorage, Alaska, landed at the Iowa City airport, took a cab up to John's, bought $1,200 worth of beer, and then flew home. And that's a road trip.
Yeah. Didn't you tell me you had a culinary arts or a beer, something in Chicago where you had your beer?
Yeah.
And they couldn't get it, or you had more beer than anybody else, or
Yeah,
different kinds
yeah.
of beer? Or what was that story in Chicago? you
So, well, and that was kind of a direct offshoot of having so many good relationships with our brewers and the breweries. In '99 we went over and toured a bunch of different breweries all over Europe, and that kind of got us on the map. And in 2005, the Wallonian and Flanders Trade Federation of Belgium decided to do a beer show at the Kendall Culinary College in Chicago, and every single beer from Belgium exported to the United States was at the show. And at that time, I had about 450 different types of beer glasses.
Wow.
And, in Belgium, if you go over there and you go into a pub, every beer is going to be served in its own glass, because it really does make a difference, because the shape of the glass is going to dictate how the beer breathes, how the aroma is funneled up to your nose. The placement of your hand is going to dictate how the beer warms up. Is your hand insulated from it or adding to it? All those things matter. So it's not just marketing to have your name on the glass, because all the glass shapes are completely different. So having that glassware, and also having my brother is just absolutely brilliant. He's always done all our IT stuff, and he actually made it so that we could sell tickets to that event before there was Ticketmaster or anything else through our website. And so they used us, and we were the only retailer that was invited to this show. And they had Belgian chocolate, they had Belgian cheese, and they held these beers. And it was so funny, because all these folks from Chicago are, no, wait a minute, you're from Iowa City?
Iowa City.
What are you doing here? Well, this is kind of what we do.
Yeah.
And it was after that we got in so many new beers. I had to start redoing the whole store, and I built the new beer cooler and flipped everything around, and it's been good ever since.
People don't realize what a treasure John's Grocery is right here in Iowa City. They just don't realize it until you get in there.
Yeah.
Tell us about your remodel, because I know you worked really hard. You worked day and night for 2 weeks to convert it from here to there. Just tell us more about that remodel.
Yeah, that was probably one of the largest projects I've ever done. Luckily, I only live like 6 blocks away from John's, and with my other business, I had plenty of room to be able to actually store all of our merchandise and all of the construction materials. But we went from being completely open to having nothing in the store except for our back freezers and our front counter. We went all the way down to the floor joists. And in some places, there was about like 5 inches of flooring that we had to take out. And we sistered on all new floor joists. And because originally, when that section of the building was built in 1884, it was a firehouse. And I could never understand why the floors sloped. Well, then when I found out it was a firehouse, oh, that makes sense. But we weren't going for level, but we were going for flat. And we ended up completely going from open to completely destroyed to back to open in 12 days. And I never want to go through that again.
You must have worked day and night.
It really was. And luckily, I have so many friends that are in the construction business, and now a lot of them actually work for me in my other business. So it's kind of fun.
Tell us about the wine tasting room now that you have.
Yeah, so we had our deli. I loved our deli. We actually got voted the best fried chicken in the state of Iowa. But unfortunately, through the pandemic, our numbers in sales went down and our prices went through the roof. My 5 gallons of oil went from $14 to $42.
Wow.
And we'd go through those 2 or 3 of those 5-gallon things of oil every week. My packaging went up, the costs went up, and it got to a point where we did a deep dive analysis on the financials, and it's kind of, we'd be better off, burning $100,000 than keeping the deli open. And so that was the hardest decision I think I've ever made, to close the deli. I know it was the right one. And in its place, we have our new tasting room, and we do tastings in there. We do our presentations in there, and we have all of our merchandise in there. And it's amazing when I get like letters or emails from people saying, I was walking down the street in Portland, Oregon, and I was rocking my Dirty John shirt, and coming the same way was somebody else with the same shirt. That lets me know that we've had an impact.
It's amazing. It's an amazing story.
Yeah.
So what else? You're making a movie. That sounds like fun.
Yeah.
June 10th?
Yeah. Well, June 10th, we're doing the first little bit of the movie, and then we'll be going forward from that. So
I think that'll be a blast. I think that'll be a hit. Your fourth generation, which is amazing. So what was the first year it started? The building's been there 175 years.
Yeah,
right?
and it's been in my family now for 75. So
75
Yeah,
years.
Grandma and Grandpa started in 1948. My grandfather was very lucky. Born and raised in Iowa City. He married his high school sweetheart from St. Mary's, and they got married 24 days after Pearl Harbor happened. Wow. And Grandpa, no questions asked, was going to enlist. He was going to enlist in the Army, but a good friend of his said, "John, you're going to die anyway, but at least join the Navy, because you're going to know where you're going to eat, where you're going to sleep, and where you're going to poop." Yeah. And so that resonated with him. So he joined the Navy, went to basic in Chicago, advanced to be a machinist mate on a submarine, Gato-class submarine, in San Diego. And Grandma went out to visit him after he graduated from San Diego, and that was kind of their de facto honeymoon, because they never really had one. And luckily for him and everybody else, his troop ship to take him to Pearl Harbor was delayed by a big storm by a number of days. And when he arrived in Pearl Harbor, his boat had been sent off without him. And that boat is on eternal patrol because it was never heard from again. And so he was temporarily and then finally permanently assigned to the Royal Hawaiian Hotel, where he actually was eventually put in charge of the laundry facility. The hotel was actually converted into the main submarine fleet headquarters for the Pacific Fleet, the Navy. And he did all sorts of odd jobs, and he kept sending money back to my grandma here at home in the form of war bonds. And so when the war ended, he came back and was working at his brother's bar, the Central Tap, where Goosetown Cafe is now. And the guy that owned the grocery store at 401 East Market Street said, "John, you should buy my business." So he had enough money saved up, and he and Grandma did. And it's been going strong in our family ever since. And my dad and his 6 brothers and sisters all grew up in the business, and a number of my cousins and my brother and sister have all worked in the store, and my kids work in there now. And it really has been a family affair. But I also look at our staff and the amazing number of folks that have got their start in the industry or just in life in working at John's is pretty heartwarming.
That's amazing. It's interesting. I think that the Royal Hawaiian in Honolulu is a pink building, isn't it? Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's all pink, a hotel. It's right on Waikiki Beach.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's interesting.
Yeah. And at one point I remember Grandpa telling me that Admiral Chester Nimitz came in and he spilled something on his dress white uniform. And he said, I've got a meeting in 2 hours, and I want this clean, pressed, and starched in 2 hours. So Grandpa was working alongside the sheriff of Honolulu's wife in the laundry, and they got the uniform cleaned and pressed, but how are they going to get the starch to dry? So Grandpa actually took the Admiral's uniform up to the roof of the Royal Hawaiian Hotel where nobody would see him. And he actually put it on and stood like a scarecrow with his arms out, letting the starch dry.
That's amazing.
It is.
Yeah, I bet Nimitz was pretty intimidating. He probably wanted to do a good job for
Oh, I'm sure. Good old Iowa boy. Yeah,
it is. It's true. So here's a story you might get a kick out of. I was in Hawaii, and I think it was New Year's Eve, and we were having champagne, Becky and I, and she ordered, I think, is it called Cristal?
Yeah.
It's really expensive
Yes,
stuff.
yeah.
And I don't really drink much, so I'm like, well, yeah, I'll have a little sip. And, I guess I'll have a glass. It was really expensive, but
Yeah.
actually it was pretty good, and I'd never had it. I think I've had Dom Perignon way back when, and that's nice stuff, too,
Yeah.
at least for, I guess, if you like champagne. And so I came home, and I said to myself, who would have a bottle of that? And I went into John's one night, and guess what? It had one bottle. It was up way above the case.
Yeah. Yep.
You didn't want anybody to take that one.
No. But that's one thing that we kind of specialize in. And it's so much fun when you have people that travel all over the world,
Right.
and they're looking for that one particular thing. Right. And one of the places where my son and I are going is Karlovy in the Czech Republic, and that's where they make Becherovka, and that's kind of like the traditional Czech liqueur. I always say that, if you drink one shot, it really does calm your stomach after a big meal. But if you do 14 shots, a plane ride home from Prague is much harder than it ever should be. But we're actually going to be going there, and to be able to tell that story of why they put because Becherova, it tastes like Christmas. That's the only thing I can say. It tastes like Christmas.
Isn't there a picture where you have beer cans that you sell, and you had empty cans, and it fills the whole picture?
Oh, yeah.
Do you have that with you? Some of the stuff you have?
Yeah, actually, yeah. It's one of them there. Yeah.
Maybe we want to roll through the slides, Doug, and just kind of
so
tell us about them.
Yeah, so that's JD and I. We're going on our little European adventure next Tuesday, and then we have our 75th anniversary kickoff party on May 31st, where we've got 11 different breweries and one distillery coming in, and we're going to have our friends from Wilson's do a bunch of the food, and so it's basically just kind of a big parking lot party on that one. And if you want to slide to the next one, then so every year we always do a benefit for the Czech and Slovak Museum and Library called Brunost, and this year will be year 20. And instead of doing our normal raffle prize, which is a trip or two including airfare and lodging to Prague for a week, this year we're actually going to be doing a couple seats on our beer tour of Bohemia and Bavaria that we're doing, that basically is a recreation of what my son and I are going to do. So next year we're going to be able to take a number of people with us and have an amazing experience. So this is our little trip. We fly into Munich, we go down to Salzburg, we go up to Česká Budějovice, the home of the original Budweiser Budvar. We go to our ancestral hometown. We go up to Prague. I'm really excited. The museum got us set up, so we're going to have lunch with the ambassador in the embassy, which, I think is going to be a pretty cool thing. Then we go to Pilsner Kell. We're going to go to the best brewing museum in the world. We're going to go to Hodovar, and they actually have a beer spa there where you actually take a bath in beer, which is really pretty interesting. Then we're going to go up to Karlovy, where Becherovka is. We go back into Bavaria. We go to Schenkerla, which is a brewery that smokes all their malt before they brew it, and it's the most amazing beer. It smells like you're standing in front of a raging bonfire when you open up that bottle for the first time. Wow. Then we go to Weinensteffen in Friesing. That's the oldest brewery in the world, dates back to 1040. And then we finish up at a little family-owned brewery in Eying, Germany, right outside of Munich. So
how long does this take?
12 days.
12 days.
Yeah, it's really a Clark W. Griswold. We're going a lot of places, but it's really not that far. If we'll go to the next slide, so All About Beer magazine named us one of the top 79 retail beer stores in the world back in the day, and that kind of led us to all the things that we had talked about. You want to go to the next slide, and that's one each of every single bottle and can of beer we had in the store back in 2005.
That's all beer?
That's all beer. Wine. Yep, that's all beer.
Because it looks like wine at the first row down
there. No, those are all Belgians down there. So, and that picture took me 3 hours to set up, 2 hours to take down, and no bottles of beer were harmed in the filming of that picture.
When we did the beer cave that night, we came back over to the store, and you were showing slides, and you had some samples. I don't remember the beer.
Yeah.
I've never tasted anything like that.
Oh yeah.
It was fantastic, and I'm like, this can't be beer.
Yeah.
So people don't realize that, if you're used to a Bud or
Oh yeah, no,
whatever
there's
you
so
drink,
many
many different
things.
kinds, and it's so tasty if you know what you're drinking.
Yeah, and that's part of it, and that's why we do so many tastings.
I'll bet.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
so yeah, this is my little presentation that I put together over the years, and going to the next one there. But yeah, that's 1857, three beers or three breweries, 40 bars for 7,000 people. I love that photo, and then this is where all the original breweries were around the store.
Right.
And then go to the next one, and then I always used to love listening to Irving Weber.
Yeah,
And
he was great.
but I always enjoyed setting up the picture exactly where it's taken. So in that picture, you see Old Brick, and then you see the Union Public House where Goosetown is, and then it kind of goes down the block. So kind of trying to line those things up rather than saying, well, on the northwest corner of Mark and Gilbert Street, you'd find So. And then this is going down into the beer caves. That's the second ladder of death that Mayor Matt Hayek's on.
Yeah.
So he'd probably be, besides you, the other most famous person that's gone down there.
Well, he's it's a little scary, but it's not bad.
It's not bad. Yeah.
You just have to get on the ladder and go down.
Yep. And that's why we have the third ladder of death now.
Matt was smiling, so that
he
makes
was,
me
yeah.
feel-
And then at one point we did a podcast down in the beer caves
you did?
with the guys from Big Grove.
Oh, really?
And
Oh,
that was
fun.
pretty cool. And we tried the Iowa City lager and the Northside Helles that they made for us. So that was pretty.
Is this going into St. Mary's then?
Actually, that's right by, and that's where you kind of see that trough where they used to float the kegs and stuff.
Right,
So
right.
yeah. And then talking about the
Mafia.
beer mafia and the book and all that, and it's amazing how many of those books we sold over.
How do you get
years.
the book?
We have them for sale at John's.
Just
all
come
the
in.
time. Yep.
So, okay.
Yep.
You
In our
should read
tasting
it.
room. Yeah, it's really
and
good.
Steve Sherman wrote that.
Yep. And then the beer riots that we talked about,
Right.
and how that led to the tar and feathering and next one.
Not a
there.
fun thing,
Yeah.
huh?
No. It definitely not to be trifled with. But that's Steve, and I used to have question marks. A movie in the making? Question mark. Well, now it's exclamation marks
Well,
because
good for you.
we are actually going ahead with it. So very excited about that. Then this is our new tasting room and all of that, and that's actually my desk. It's not a piano. It's a bar, but that also doubles as my desk there. So
It's very nice.
and that's the full family. So the upper left hand picture, that's the store in 1899. That Erlanger that was made right across the street. Their motto was the beer that made Milwaukee jealous, and that was a direct quip because the owner. George Buffoon, who owned the saloon there in the white apron, only served Pabst Blue Ribbon because at that time they had tied houses, and in that case you could only get a Pabst. And then we decided to replicate the 1899 shot back in 2006, and my son JD was the dog in that photo. And then when we did the last one a couple years ago, we actually had our dog be the dog, so that was kind of fun. And that was my dad and DJ, my old general manager. Dad just passed away last year, and so it's been really weird being the elder statesman of John's. But it's life goes on. You just gotta keep moving forward.
Yeah.
So
That's a great picture.
thank you. Yeah.
So that's it.
Yep.
So anything else here before we wrap up? You can think about, because I think if you don't know much about the history of John's, I'm glad that we could share this
Oh yeah.
today.
No, thank you.
And
Thank
you have everything in the store. The store is magnificent. If you've not been into John's, you need to go into John's.
Yeah.
And you have everything. A great wine selection also. We didn't really
Yep.
talk about that, but you do.
Yeah.
And of course, I mentioned the champagne way up on top.
Yes, yeah. Well, and we try to specialize. We have a saying, and it's kind of, if we don't have it, you really don't need it.
Right.
And we just did a fundraiser for the nurses at the oncology, the Children's Museum this past Saturday with Northwestern Mutual. We called it the Kenneck Derby, and it was a Kentucky Derby themed. And we did a bunch of different bourbons that we tasted out, and it's so much fun because I have experts, and you can go a lot of places to buy different things, but we'll make sure you leave with only what you need.
Right.
And I tell my guys that we are storytellers, and when you can relate that story, it matters. And I also kind of joke that, we give such good service, we'll even come home and help you drink it if you really need us to.
Yeah,
So
great. An added service, right?
Yes,
So,
yes.
Well, we've been talking about beer here with Doug Alberhasky of John's Grocery. And if you have never been there, get out there and check it out, and check out the beer selections and the wines. And you can always probably see Doug running around there. So it's been great to see you, Doug. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you very much for having me.
Appreciate
it. Yeah, thank you.